How's it going, everybody? We are here with another episode of the Coolie McDoolie podcast. I am Colby Spitz, per usual, here again with the wonderful, the funny, and the insightful Billy Gillane. And today we got a special Black Panther review for you today. We're going to go a little in depth. We're going to start with about a 5 to 10 minute, just a non-spoiler review for anybody who hasn't seen the flick yet. I think we can both agree that it's one worth catching. And then we're going to go, after that, we're going to go a little while, go in depth with spoilers and how we think it fits into the Marvel cinematic universe and leading up to Infinity Wars. And we're going to get a little bit into all the technicalities in that way. All right, so without further ado, we'll get right into the non-spoiler section. All right, Billy, what are your first impressions of the film?
I loved this film. It's for me. It's I think one of the best MCU movies I've seen. I know, obviously, that can change. I said the same thing about Thor Ragnarok, and that didn't last. My opinion, at least. But no, I like this movie. It was everything I wanted to see out of this movie, and then some. I think all the performances were great. I think they got the villain perfect this time. This is the best MCU villain I think I've seen. The story flowed fantastically. It was shot beautifully. Wakanda looks absolutely amazing. I have no complaints, or very, very few minor complaints, if anything, about this film.
Yeah, I'm very much on the same boat. I went into this film with a lot more hype than I usually go into a superhero movie nowadays with, and it didn't let me down. Chadwick Boseman's performance blew me away. He was phenomenal, and Michael B. Jordan, like you said, was a phenomenal villain. Up there, if not the best Marvel Cinematic Universe villain, in the top 2, 3.
Yeah,
Definitely up there in the very top.
Yeah, I'd put him right up there with probably Loki in the first Thor movie as far as quality.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. Now, like you said, there were a few flaws, but those are technical and they kind of get into the story a little bit. But as a very hot take, this is at least in my top 5 MCU films, if not a little bit higher. Just everything seemed to flow very well. The cinematic aspects of it really, like, it was very beautiful to watch. There were a few times I was just sitting in the theater and I gasped, just because it was breathtaking. Like the atmosphere of the film was, it was incredible. That's the best word I can think. It was just incredible.
Absolutely, like I said earlier, Wakanda is actually absolutely beautiful in this movie. The way it's shot, the way it's made to look through CGI or whatever, it's absolutely amazing and breathtaking to look at. All the technology and all that stuff, the lab. I don't know if this is a spoiler, but the lab was fantastic. The way that looked. I loved the look of this film. I loved the story in this film. I loved most everything about this film. I can't say more than that. I mean,
and then another thing that I will say is it touched on some hot button issues, but did it very in a very classy way, I guess, and integrated into the story while still hitting the nail on the head with some of the things that are going on in today's society, with the black culture and with different races and poverty and a lot of the issues that the world, not just America, not just where Wakanda would be, but just in the world as a whole, a lot of issues that people are facing.
yeah, and for anybody who would be worried about seeing this movie because it touches those issues, it doesn't sacrifice anything story wise, character wise to tell these issues. They're integrated very well, and I don't feel like they're super heavy handed about it either. I feel like they're very, as you said, classy. I think is a great word in addressing these issues, and I think they did a great job doing so.
Absolutely. So overall, I have to say, this is up there with my like I said, up there with my favorite Marvel Cinematic Universe films. I would even go as far to say just superhero films in general. This is in the very top. A lot of the performances were really impressive, And then some of the character lines did surprise me where they started, what I expected from them, and then where they ended
Mhm.
up.
Yeah,
Um,
that's the other thing about this film is I feel like they did a great job of giving almost, if not every character, some sort of character development, even the minor characters, even the supporting characters. You obviously have that with the three or four main characters in the film, but the smaller characters all have really well developed stories, and they change throughout the film in an organic way.
and then, yeah, absolutely. And then another thing that I will mention, and then we'll get right into spoilers. Um, some of the women warrior in the female warriors in this movie, um, they weren't playing damsel in distress type characters, but it wasn't forcing feminism on you. It balanced where the story is with kind of changing with the times. It balanced that line very well. And
Mm.
I kept comparing it to Wonder Woman in that, and how important of a film this was, and yet how right they did get it. They didn't take the idea of the black culture or the African culture lightly. They knew what was they were getting themselves into, and they really did take it seriously, and they got it really right.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that, man. So do you want to get into spoilers now, then?
Yeah, let's go ahead. Let's jump right into spoilers.
Spoilers.
Um, So yeah, if you haven't seen this yet, I strongly suggest clicking off, driving out and seeing this movie, and then come back and finish the episode.
Yeah, the last part, finish the episode. That's the important part.
All right, so let's go ahead and get started. What was your overall take as to how the story started, how it ended up, and how it fits into the MCU?
Uh, that's a big question. Uh,
Gotta start off with a bang.
okay, I think this film felt, while it did service the MCU a little bit. Obviously, you had characters we've seen before. Post credit scene, obviously, you get Bucky at the very end. You get Martin 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 Freeman's character. Throughout the film, I forgot the character's name, but he was in Civil War. You've seen him before.
Right.
It takes place after the events of Civil War, so you do get the idea that it's attached to the MCU, but this film is very separate from, I think, a lot of MCU movies. It's its own film first, and these characters interact very much with themselves, each other, and Wakanda, and that's probably what I love most about this film, because I love the MCU, man, but some of these films, like, they interact with each other so much. It's like Captain America Civil War. It's about Captain America, but there's like 50 superheroes in that film. It was nice to see an MCU film where there's just, this is the hero, these are the people around the hero, this is the villain. Um, and it's almost completely separate from the rest of the MCU in that capacity.
Yeah, definitely. And then another thing that I will say is the compared, like, so a lot of people, whether you think it's a compliment or you think it's something that detracted from the film, was a small scale of Spider-Man Homecoming. How
Yeah.
everything felt very small and enclosed in the world of Peter Parker. But I will argue that this one, at least to me, it felt even far more small scale than that. It felt like this was an important thing to happen for the Wakanda people.
Hmm.
But besides that, it didn't affect the United States. It didn't affect all these other countries. It was small scale to them and them only. And you
But
kind of
even,
get that example with the first post credit scene out of the two, in that Chadwick Boseman's character goes up, and then at the end, one of the uh, people on the nations on the panel, they even say, what does Wakanda have to offer? How can a Wakanda help? So they entirely just missed everything that happened. So they
Mhm.
just don't even know, and I think that tells a lot about the story and about these people, like where they're coming from and how enclosed that they really are.
Yeah, the one thing I will say though is the implications the film has at the end of the film are very much global and will have a great effect on the world. Choosing, obviously, to share the vibranium and help people throughout the world better their lives,
Yeah,
improve
absolutely.
technology and stuff like that, which is very much the debate, if you will, that the film centers around. Is Wakanda has this great power source, this great resource, and what they should do with it, if they should continue to isolate it and use it only for themselves to better themselves, or if they should go global with it and use it to really help society in general. And that was at the crux of the film. That was the central theme, the central idea of the film, the central conflict of the film, if you will.
Definitely. And then I will say that, just to tease a little bit, as soon as I got into as soon as I start to, as soon as we got to the actual film, the beginning, it's about a minute or two of just kind of backstory of Wakanda, and the way that that was done, all the characters were built out of the vibranium material, and it's just an animation, that gives you the backstory. I mean, I from then on I was engaged in this film. I
Yeah,
thought that was especially beautiful. I was genuinely stunned by that. It was very similar to how Wonder Woman gave their backstory. It felt very
yeah,
similar.
yeah. The one thing I will say, I guess, if we're going to the beginning of the film, the opening scene with actual actors, not just an open narration or backstory. But I guess it is still kind of backstory for the film. Is the scene where they're in the where they're in Oakland in 1992, I believe,
Yeah.
and it's T'Challa, whichever one's the father, and his brother, and they're having the whole conversation, and the crux of the beef between um, the Black Panther and the ultimate villain of this film, Michael B. Jordan's character. I can't remember any of these characters' names for whatever reason, but that scene is very important to the rest of the movie. It's the crux of the villain's motivations. It's the center of the very much the center of the whole Wakanda versus the world thing. And if I don't know if you want to go into the characters now, but we could segue into that and talk about how that whole conflict between sharing with the world or keeping it within Wakanda, the vibranium, is very central to the plight of the characters. So the villain is on one extreme, and then the heroes, most of the heroes throughout the film, are on the other extreme, and then the balance obviously is in the middle at the end of the film.
Right. Okay. So yeah, let's like you mentioned, let's get into that. So let me ask you a question. What character, they're either where they began and where they ended up, their arc, or what actually happened to them in the end? Who surprised you the most? What did you not expect to happen? What were you most surprised by?
Um, that's a good question. Um, Surprised? I don't know who I was most surprised by. I was most pleased with um, Michael B. Jordan's character, the villain of the film, and I'm going to say the character's name now. I have IMDb pulled up. Killmonger.
Right.
I was very, very pleased with his whole arc and his whole story and the way he was used in this film. He's not too much in this film at the very beginning. You don't see much of him, but as the film progresses, obviously he becomes much more integral, and he becomes ultimately a sympathetic villain, I think, and that's something that I think we're starting to get more with the MCU. We got in Spider-Man: Homecoming, and now we're getting it in this film. We've had in the past really with Loki, but other than that, I mean, it's been stereotypical villain A, stereotypical villain B, and stereotypical villain C. It was really nice. This Killmonger was my favorite villain so far I've seen in the MCU. I loved everything they did with him.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I was very pleasantly pleased with that. There was a few parts where I was like, okay, I want a little bit more. But one character that I will say, he's slipping my Andy Serkis's character,
Yeah,
um,
Claw.
Claw, right? I expected so much more out of that character, and
Hmm.
just the way it was marketed, he was in a few parts. I expected him to be the main villain of the film. Like obviously, I knew Michael B. Jordan was playing the villain, but I expected him
So,
to be a large counterpiece to it. And before even the halfway mark, that he dies, and which and clearly we're in spoilers here. They kill him. Michael B. Jordan's character does, and from then on, I kind of had to take a seat back, because I try my best not to guess what's going to happen in a movie, but especially being I think the 18th or 19th Marvel Cinematic film.
High teens at this point, yeah.
Yeah, so it's the 19th. So it's at this point it's easy to just guess. Oh well, this character's gonna live, this character's gonna die, and this is how the character's gonna die. You kind of can start to just piece it together as it goes. But once they did kill off Circus's character Claw, I took a seat back. I took a step back, and I just said, you know what, you guys are just gonna take me on a ride. I can tell. And from then on, things only escalated from there.
Yeah. So let me get this straight. I'm sorry to bring it here, but you're talking about you're surprised that an Andy Serkis secondary villain in a major movie sponsored by Disney died early and abruptly. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I guess so.
That sounds vaguely familiar to a movie that came out a couple months ago.
Does it? Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not gonna bring it there. No, I like what they did with his character in this film. I feel like he had enough to do early in the film that I wasn't upset when they killed him off, and I feel his death served both the story that they were telling and the character in Killmonger in a great way. And it also, like I said, it gave other characters motivations. Daniel Kumail's character. I once again I don't know any of these characters' names. I'm gonna figure this out. Wakabi. The whole reason I feel he ends up kind of taking Killmonger's side in this war, and at least initially, is because he brings with him Claw. He brings Claw's body back to Wakanda. So I feel that had relevance in the story, so I wasn't upset about him being killed off necessarily.
Right. I wouldn't say I was disappointed that he was killed off, but he did seem to have a very integral part in the beginning of the film and where the story ended up. I just wish there was a little bit more on him. Maybe if had he lasted 10 more minutes, or we had a little bit more pieces from him, overall it could have wrapped around a lot better.
And like I said earlier, Killmonger's not in this movie tons at the beginning. He's introduced, I think, probably 20 minutes into the film, if I had to guess, around 20 minutes in the film he's introduced. And he's not in many of those early scenes even after he's introduced. It's really not until after they kill off Claw that he becomes the main villain of the film. It was very much Claw before that point, but once again, I don't have an issue with them doing that. I think it served both characters well, and it made sense because this isn't the first time we've seen Claw. He was in Age of Ultron, which is why I believe we saw he got the vibranium arm in that movie. I might be mistaken about that. But he never felt to me like he was going to be a major character in the MCU, even seeing him in Age of Ultron. So I wasn't expecting tons of him in this film, and I didn't really get it. I got enough of him. I don't think I got tons of him, though. I don't think.
Right. And I do think the performances and how it did lead into Michael B. Jordan's character, his arc as a villain, I think that both characters benefited greatly from that. It gave you cause and effect. It gave you reasons to empathize with them while still rooting for Black Panther himself. I think it was very well handled.
Yeah, no, Killmonger, I'm more forgiving of this because Killmonger is my favorite character in this film. I absolutely enjoyed what they did with him. And I guess one more thing I will say about him, I got a very, in a way, a Hamlet vibe from the story they were telling with him. In the sense that the uncle kills the father. Obviously, it's switched because the uncle's the king, killing the father instead of the father being the king, being killed by the uncle. But it's very much a different twist, a little bit on the classic legendary story Hamlet. So
it's funny that you bring up Hamlet because as I was watching it more than a few times, I either quoted The Lion King or I referenced it. I started singing "I Just Can't Wait to Be King" at a certain point. And obviously, I didn't start singing in the theater. It's
No,
in my
but
head, but
that's the thing is, it's not so much the hero story, and it's not T'Chaka's story that um, reflects these. It's the villain story. It's Killmonger's story that has more of a reflection on the Lion King or Hamlet
right.
than the hero, which I think is a fascinating twist to go that direction with the villain instead of the hero.
Yeah, absolutely. You kind of you see where Killmonger, where he grew up and how he grew up. He didn't want world domination. He didn't want to rule everyone. He just wanted everyone to be fair and to live the right way. Now, his methods of doing that and the way he went about his things had a
I
twist to it.
Yeah, I don't know if he wanted everybody to live fairly than the right way. I think he just wanted revenge more so on the people at the top, more so than having everybody treated fairly and living in a, let's all hold hands perfect place. You wanted revenge on the oppressors as opposed to
Sure. Okay, yeah,
a peaceful world.
that's a fair way of looking at it.
Which is, like I said, you have two extremes in this film. His extreme is, yes, let's use the vibranium, but we're going to use it to arm those who can't arm themselves in order to fight back against the oppressors all around the world. And he's talking about London. He mentions a couple other cities there that they were ready to go. His is very, like I said, it's very much to that one extreme point of view in terms of using the vibranium.
Right. Now, okay. Now let's kind of do a mini breakdown, and then we'll get back to characters in a little bit. Now, what were your thoughts on the casino scene, where where Claw is going to sell the vibranium sword? What were your thoughts on that entire sequence?
Yeah, most of the action in this film I felt served the story fairly well, if not very well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this scene in particular, the action chase you get, I don't want to say it was action for the sake of action because it did have a story. It did have story relevance, but it did a little bit feel out of place in the. And that's the thing with this film is I feel like the first act, maybe because they're out of Wakanda for much of it, feels very different than the rest of the movie. And this scene I think epitomizes that.
Exactly. That's how I'm kind of feeling. Now, you did mention some of the action sequences. I just want to say, this film, out of most likely any other MCU film, there may be things that I'm missing here, or examples that I'm missing, but this probably had some of my favorite action sequences altogether out of an MCU film. We weren't oversaturated with everything being in slow motion.
Yeah.
Sometimes the gun flash would just, hit this, would go in front of the camera or the screen, and then you would, go to a different angle, or you would see him fighting someone else. And I just really appreciated the way they did that, and it was handled
Yeah.
very well.
It was all shot very well, the action scenes, and you're right, they didn't do tons of the slow motion, like, oh hey, look how cool this is. They did that I think the one time with him like flipping over the car,
Right.
um, which I didn't mind it there. I was gonna say something and it just ran out of my mind. Oh, I remember. But the action, the thing that elevates the action to me in this film is it serves the story I think about as well as it can, as well
Yeah,
as action can. It feels natural, it feels authentic to the story they're telling, and that enhances it so much.
I can agree with that. And then that was, I'm gonna keep comparing this to Wonder Woman because in my eyes they're very similar films.
Yeah.
They both tackle very big issues, and they both do it very well. But one of my flaws with Wonder Woman was it felt like every time somebody was fighting, 90% of it was slowed down, so you could see her deflect a bullet, you could see her block something with her shield, you could see her hit somebody with a sword. It felt like everything was slowed down and tried to show her in a much more just like, oh, so this isn't actually that cool, but if we slow it down, wow, doesn't she look like a badass?
Well, that's the thing with characters who use speed like that, like the Flash too, and in Justice League you saw that the slowing down, unless it's done right, it can really affect it. Like the X-Men movies, the most recent, Days of Future Past, for example, the slow motion scene they do there with Quicksilver was fantastic. So it was
Right.
well done and well executed. Um, Slow motion can be a benefit if it's done right. If it's not done right, it can really drag the action down.
Right. You take a scene that should be maybe 2 minutes or a quick fight and you drag it out and then you get bored of it very quickly. While with Black Panther, I was always waiting for the next fight scene. I was intrigued and I was excited for them to keep doing it and
Yeah.
to how he was going to fight and the different styles. And, the lack of slow motion really benefits that. It gives you a much more real sense of how the fights were going and how they played out. I definitely think it deserves some applause for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, one of the things I think we should maybe get into is problems with the film. So I guess I'll ask you first. Did you have any major problems with this film, or what were your minor problems if you only have minor problems?
So yeah, like you were saying, the first act, it felt like it was dragging a little bit, especially that casino scene. As much as it was fun to look at, and it kept me engaged through the movie. It seemed very useless. Claw brings out the bag that, funny enough, it was wrapped in a paper bag. It said fragile. That got a good laugh out of everybody in my theater, including myself. But after he pulls that out, after, all that dies down, as far as I know, it doesn't come back. It just kind of drops off there, and it felt a little off.
You talking about the scene, the hammer he has, or the vibranium he has?
Yeah.
Um, from what I gathered, I may be wrong about this, but after he stops him in that car chase that follows the casino scene, I believe he grabs the vibranium because Claw crawls out of the car. The Claw crawls out of the car, and he has the bag with the vibranium in it. So I think the implication is when they took him in that they got the vibranium back.
Right, but still, it seemed like a lot of time spent on that bag just for it to kind of disappear. Like, I get that they still had that they were able to take the bag back or take the weapon back, but it felt very out of place. Like, you could have given him something more substantial. You could have given him because what I originally expected going into this film was he was going to make. I lost his name. The villain's suit. He was going to make him a necklace.
Killmonger, yeah.
Killmonger. He was going to make him the necklace. He was going to make him the suit using that vibranium, and that's not the way it goes. Which is one, why I was surprised of Circus's death early, and two, that was kind of where I feel like they could have improved a great deal.
Yeah. Can he make stuff out of vibranium, or does he just sell it to people who want to make with it whatever they do?
Well, he has the fake hand that shoots. So I feel like even if not him personally making it, but he can supply someone to make it for him.
Yeah.
So it was just on that same idea.
Yeah. So I guess your problem is that doesn't really have much relevance later on.
Yeah, there were a few things that just felt like we could have taken them out, and I don't want them just taken out altogether because some of the action sequences, like I said, were phenomenal and exciting to watch, but just replaced it with something a little bit more substantial to the end result.
Or maybe condense it a little more.
Sure.
Because this was over 2 hours.
Right.
So it wasn't like it was a short movie. It was a decently long movie that could have definitely shortened perhaps that casino scene or something else. Yeah, I tend to agree with you, though. I feel like that scene I think is the most obvious example of them extending things that probably could be shortened. We didn't need to be in that casino as long as we were in that casino. But once again, it's minor. It's not a huge thing. The rest of the movie is fantastic. But definitely that scene. And then the thing I said earlier with the first act, that scene in particular, that time period in particular, felt a little out of place or different from the remainder of the film.
Yeah, it really, in context of the entirety of the film, that first act drags and drags, and then because everything after that is very quick fire,
Yeah.
One action sequence to another, one dramatic sequence to another, one character arc to another. But then that first act, you're not getting too much. You're just getting a little bit of a build up, I guess.
Yeah. The film, I think, definitely shifts when Killmonger kills Claw. I think once Killmonger becomes the main villain, that's for me when this film gets as absolutely fantastic. The last 2/3 to half of that film are amazing,
Absolutely.
absolutely amazing. It's some of my favorite MCU I've ever seen. The last, like I said, 2/3 or half of that movie, some of the best I've seen from the MCU. Um, and I think that point in the film is when it kind of turns, is when he kills Claw and then goes back to Wakanda. I think that's the shift in the film.
Definitely. All right. And then one question for you.
Okay.
In your entire 19 different Stanley cameos we've gotten throughout the MCU, what do you think of the Black Panther Stanley cameo?
Can you just take somebody else's chips even if they walk away from the table? Is that like a thing?
You
Yeah.
know what? I was thinking the same thing. Is that allowed?
Like if that's the case, like I'll sit next to somebody and be like, "Oh, yeah, you dropped something all the way back there." Be like, thanks.
Hey, man, I guess you can take those chips if you're Stanley.
That's fair, but I guess that really doesn't matter. But I enjoy his cameo. I usually enjoy his cameos. I don't remember all of his cameos. If you're asking me to rank them all, it's
Maybe
there's like
that's a video for another day.
15-second clips in each MCU film that I'm not going to really remember very well. Like, did he even like? I don't even remember if he had a cameo in any of the Iron Man films, and if he did, I don't remember what they were at all. So
Yeah.
that's I like it. I usually like his cameos, and I like it in this. So,
Yeah, they're always good for a chuckle or two in the middle of
yeah.
usually they're usually good about putting him in when a scene starts to dull a little bit, when it starts to hit its low point. You put him in there, everybody's like, "Oh, it's Stanley," and then things pick up again. You get the intense action sequences.
Well, one thing I will say is his cameo took place in the early part of the film. The early part of the film was much more. There was a lot more comedy in the first part of the film. I think
Right.
a lot of that has to do with, once again, Claw's character is quite funny and with a lot of what he does. Um, so they put his cameo where there's a lot more comedy as opposed to later on in the film, where his cameo wouldn't really make any sense to happen in a very serious string of events taking place in an African nation of Wakanda, in the African nation of Wakanda. It wouldn't make sense to have Stanley make a cameo at any point there. So
Yeah, I think they did. They handled it well. They didn't try and force it in on you. They just put it where it fit, and I just thought
yeah,
that was a fair question to ask. If we're talking about MCU, you have to bring in Stanley. So
yeah. So I feel like one character that we haven't touched much on is the main character himself, T'Challa, the Black Panther. So I guess what are your thoughts on his character and what we saw from him?
so ever since I did see him in Civil War, I was very intrigued. I was very excited because Chadwick Boseman, being one of my favorite actors, I really just think that he embodies what Black Panther looks like in film form. Not that
Yeah.
they just cast an actor, but that he is the embodiment of the Black Panther.
Mhm.
And he kind of shows that throughout the progression of the film. It was really nice to see him get his standalone that he deserves, and he grows as a person, comes to these realizations, and you really do feel for where he's coming from, where he thinks the world of his father, and then he thinks nothing of his father, and then he kind of hits that balance where no one's perfect. And I really appreciated the story. It wasn't a story arc. It didn't go middle and then up and then down. It just went up, down, up, down, up, down. And you respect this character and you lose some respect. Not for the character, but for what they've gone through or for how they treat some people. And I
Mhm.
really appreciated that.
Yeah, no, I absolutely enjoyed his character. I enjoyed his performance. Chadwick Boseman's one of my favorite actors as well, and I loved him in Civil War, so I was very excited to see him in this film. To what you're saying, I loved his character arc. I think once again, I'm going back to this again. You have the two extremes. He's very much on the other end of that extreme, where no, this is for us. This vibranium is for us in Wakanda. We're going to keep it to ourselves. It's not our obligation or our duty to protect the world or help the world. It's our obligation for our people here in Wakanda. He's there. Obviously, you said what happens with his father, what he realizes, kind of helps him change perspective a little bit and be like, okay, maybe we should help people. Maybe we should use what we have to help people. Because one thing that I think is important is Martin Freeman's character. They bring him in and help him. They save his life with the vibranium after he gets hit in the spine. He gets shot in the spine. Um, I think that's another moment where he kind of realizes, like, oh, hey, what we have here is something we need to use to help people
Exactly.
around the world.
That does change a lot of what happens in the rest of the film. The realization that the materials that we are, overflowing with, should be used. We saved this man's life, who saved one of our own lives. We need to embrace that and save millions of other peoples that we can.
Mm-hmm.
And then so that kind of leads into another thing. The relationship between T'Challa and his little sister. That was one of my favorite things in the entire film. The bantering back and forth, the respect that they still had for each other, and then just how they worked together. I really, really enjoyed that. It made me laugh, but it also, being somebody with siblings, you kind of feel that you relate to both. How you guys are
Mm-hmm.
always gonna bicker, and I can't imagine if my older brother were to become king of a nation, how much crap I would give him about that.
About being king.
Yeah,
Yeah. Um, no, she was his little sister was one of my favorite characters in this film. Um, for me, the funniest scene of the movie was, or the funniest part of the movie, I guess, not the scene part, is when they're at that ritual fight.
yeah,
Um, and they're asking, does anybody of royal blood want to challenge for the throne? And she kind of raises her hand and then says some like super sarcastic, smart ass comment, and it had me dying. I was cracking up at that, but I think that their relationship is very viable, it's believable, and it's natural. Um, as are most of the relationships in this film, they're very organic. That's something that I appreciate about this film. The only relationship that to me wasn't super organic was the top guard Nakia and what's his name Wakabi's relationship. I don't know if we see any of them two together at any point until the very end of the film, and they're apparently together. I they said it earlier in the film, but you never actually saw it until the very end of the film.
right.
I
Which
just
it kind of gets into the idea that, like, I'm glad that they didn't oversaturate it with all this romantic fairy tale type stuff. But at the same time, that was a very pivotal scene in the surrender,
Mhm.
of Killmonger's, I guess, the rebellion almost. Um,
Yeah.
but in the same time, I wanted a little bit more just to lead up to that as to how substantial that would have been for those two.
Yeah, I'm like I said, I don't mind if they have like if there's just one scene of them having an interaction. I don't mind, but it's like it's something that's mentioned offhand once, and then they have that scene at the end. I
Exactly.
and like I said, you're right. I don't want this movie to be bogged down by by love stories. We've seen what effect that can have on certain movies that focus too heavily on that. Um, but this in particular, because you're right, it is such a crucial scene, crucial point of the movie. It would have been nice to see something of them two interacting before that to get that feeling of a relationship between the two.
Exactly. And then, so you did touch on this just a few minutes ago. What were your overall thoughts of the way that both the ritual fights, the to be king or to step in line or change who was king? How did you feel about the way they were handled?
I loved them. I love both scenes. Um, the first one, obviously, you get introduced to a character that comes back later, the leader of the Jeru or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the leader of the fifth clan or tribe of the five tribes that isolated themselves. You get introduced to that tribe and that leader, and he comes back obviously later in the film to help them out. And I liked the way that scene went. I buy that that's something they would do, obviously, because they're very big on tradition, at least early in the film. And then the second one, obviously, I really appreciated it because it was such a dramatic moment, such a pivotal moment for pretty much every character in the film. It was, I'd argue, outside of the ending, obviously, it was the pivotal moment in the film up to the end was that second ritual fight where Killmonger and T'Challa, and Killmonger ultimately, obviously, throws him off the edge of the cliff, and he becomes king.
Yeah, I will say that both of them had me, even though I had a good idea as to what was going to happen, I was still gripping my seat, just, who will win, where is this story going to take us, because that's the kind of movie it is. It's not,
Mm-hmm.
you guys know where you're going, let's just show you how it goes. It's where is this going to take us, what's going to happen next. And then one of my favorite just moments in the film is when Michael B. Jordan actually takes off his shirt to reveal all the little scars he has, which he mentions before in the film that each one is for somebody he's killed. But at the time, he only rolls up his sleeve. You see like a dozen, maybe 2 dozen, and he takes off his shirt and his body's covered. I thought that was a very well done scene. It was a very interesting reveal to see that this guy's not a joke. Take him seriously because he's been through shit, and he continues to, he's almost like the soldier, the super soldier type thing.
Yeah. It's like I said, we get to the point where he becomes a sympathetic villain. A lot of it's his backstory, obviously what he goes through with his father being killed growing up. He's essentially abandoned by then his uncle and Wakanda at that point as a kid, and then obviously he goes to war. He's in Afghanistan. He's in Iraq. He mentions and gets a boatload of kills. Is an amazing soldier apparently, and to see him, it gives him that believability of this is a guy you don't want to mess with. This is a
Exactly.
guy who knows what's up, but at the same time, it gives him much more of a sympathetic feeling. Both those things are served with his backstory, and like I said, he's my favorite character in the film. Everything they did with him, I loved. So this scene I loved because it was, like I said, the true introduction to who he is as a character, I think.
Right. And then one thing I will say about his character, I know we've been talking about him a lot, but he is he's a very interesting character, and you grow a lot with him.
Mm-hmm.
But if you were to just hear the backstory of him, you know, his father dies when he's very young in California. You know, you never really know his mother, and he's just forgotten by, you know, let's call Wakanda his family, or just, you know,
Right.
this his support group. Everybody turns their back on him, and then he grows to become this incredible soldier. Kills aren't the important thing, but he like, I believe he even mentions he was in Iraq, he was in
Yeah.
Afghanistan. You know, he did multiple tours in all these wars, and then he goes, and the entire motivation behind him is to, I know we got into this, but it's to help the oppressed, or so it's maybe not to even the playing field, but it's to give power to those that are ignored and almost
Mm-hmm.
kicked around in society.
Yeah.
And so, without knowing he's a villain, he has a very heroic story. At least in terms of traditional stories, he
Mm-hmm.
would be considered the hero. And I thought it was a very interesting take, so that even when he's fighting the Black Panther, you don't want to really root against him, because he has, you know, in his heart, his intentions are good.
Yeah. That's and then back to this point, everything you just said reiterates the fact that, like, a lot of elements that make a hero, a traditional hero that we think of in a film, are given to this character. You know, he has that Hamlet story that we touched on. He has these traits you mentioned. He was abandoned as a kid. He fought. He was a soldier, a really kick-ass soldier. He wants to help the oppressed rise up. Like, that's all stuff that would make a great hero. But yet this film makes it a villain, a great villain, and a very sympathetic villain. And to me, that's like I said, this is the best part of the film.
Exactly. And that's, Spider-Man Homecoming before this had one of my favorite villains in Vulture. Because you see where he's coming from and you see why he does what he does. But then I feel like Black Panther just took that a mile and a half further. And it really, you sympathize with him and you're rooting for him while you're supposed to be rooting against him. And it was really, I just was really behind both characters. And I was happy to see how much you just care to see where it does go.
No, absolutely, man. So is there anything, other characters, I guess you'd want to touch on real quick, or?
I think just overall, if we're talking about everyone in I guess the Wakandi tribe or the nation, everybody fit so well. Angela Bassett as the queen or as Black Panther's mother, she had great chemistry with him as well as her daughter, but she also felt a lot from when I guess it would have been her nephew as Killmonger when he comes back and she realizes she starts to piece it together without knowing the full story. It makes for a lot of very nice moments just between everybody in the film.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as you mentioned, all the characters in Wakanda, the people that are on essentially T'Challa's side, they're all fantastically well done. His sister, his mother, his, I guess, girlfriend, spy, the spy,
Right.
Okoye, I think is her name. Yeah, Okoye. And then Lupita Nyong'o's character is also. They're all done really well. Both how they're written and the performances for them. I have infinite respect for what they did with these characters, all these characters in this film, because once again, they all got arcs, believable, natural feeling arcs were given to all these minor characters, or most of these minor characters, I should say, and I really appreciate all that we got from that.
Now, one thing that I will ask you, but first let me touch on it. Forrest Whitaker's character, as he plays, I guess, kind of the headmaster, not king, but the one who he's almost the leader, supervisor. I don't know what you would actually call him.
Kind of like a priest almost.
Yeah, he's almost like a priest type. You really do fall. You kind of grow to appreciate him and have a lot of respect for what he does and who he is.
Mm-hmm.
And at the moment when Killmonger kills him, even though it's kind of obvious and you see it coming, it kind of hits you. It hits you pretty hard that now the people that they looked up to are now gone, and that the dismal moment is coming for the character where he falls to what is his supposed death, and Forrest Whitaker's character also dies. It does the dismal very well, but one thing I would have liked to see is it would have been, at least in my opinion, from a storyteller's eyes, the scene where Killmonger has the flowers burned that gives them the power, or it can take away the power of the Black Panther. Had Forrest Whitaker been present for that, and he had been the one trying to stop him instead of the female, I can't think of her name, I feel like that would have made for such an impactful scene. Seeing what he resorts to all, what he gardens them. We see him gardening them multiple times, and he's the one who follows through with the rituals. I think that could have been a really interesting and very emotionally heavy scene had that been in the timeline a little bit differently.
Yeah. So I guess my question to that would be, how would you have had him survive at that ritual then, and go to the point where the scene where they burn down the herbs? How would you have had him survive to that point?
I probably wouldn't have had him die at all at the ritual. You keep him alive through that, but then in Killmonger's first spree as king, when he goes to burn those flowers, he kind of sacrifices himself along with the flowers or with the herbs, so that he's part of that dying. It would have felt, in my opinion, it would have felt a lot more cohesive.
Yeah. Um. So what I will say to that is, I feel if he died there instead of when he did, it wouldn't have had as much of an impact. You say sacrifice himself, but if he did that, I wouldn't really be sure what he's sacrificing himself for at that point.
It would have been his last ditch effort to kind of overthrow the king.
Mm-hmm.
And he's kind of, don't burn down this it was almost a temple, and don't burn it down, don't tear it to dust. And it would have given Killmonger just like a little step of ruthlessness. Not ruthlessness, but nobody's gonna stop me from accomplishing what I want. And it also would have given Forrest Whitaker's character and just the entirety of Wakanda just this dismal hopelessness feeling.
Yeah, the one thing I will say is I buy him dying at the ritual a lot more than I would him dying there, because at the ritual he's dying protecting somebody who he deeply cares about and deeply loves, and dying because he's realized I made a major mistake in my life keeping this a secret for so long and ultimately abandoning this kid in Oakland. So him killing him there to me feels more like this is what I deserve, but T'Challa doesn't deserve this. So I'm going to save him, but I deserve to die for what I did. That's what that feels like to me.
I think that's fair, and I'm not trying to knock it for what it did, because I do still really appreciate the way that they took his character and integrated him into the story a few different times without him being a main character or even a supporting character very much.
Yeah, because that's the other thing for me is him standing up to it was more to defend T'Challa than to stop Killmonger, because he doesn't hate Killmonger. He has, I think, he feels bad about what he did to Killmonger. He feels sympathetic and like he did this person wrong. He doesn't hate this person. He just, T'Challa's not responsible for it. He knows that T'Challa doesn't deserve to die for it. So in attempting to save T'Challa, he's going to insert himself into this situation. That's what I got from that scene.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's definitely good on Black Panther's part of the movie itself that we can have these discussions, but yet we still came out feeling that this was a phenomenal film. At least I know I did.
Absolutely, man. Is there anything else you want to add, or should we get to our grades of the film?
No, I just got one more question. In the entirety of the MCU, do you put this in the top 5, middle 5, or can you give it the number 1 spot? Where are you putting it there?
I'm not gonna give this film the number 1 spot. I'm not gonna give any film the number 1 spot after immediately seeing it. Especially when there's films in the MCU that are as great as Winter Soldier or Civil War. Winter Soldier to me it's a top 5 superhero movie of all time. But this is more or less going to be I'd imagine it's going to end up in my top 5 MCU films to this point.
All right, yeah, I think that's very fair. At the moment, it's sitting in my top 3. That may either go up or down with more viewings of it. But, I can't say enough nice things about this.
No, this is a fantastic film. And like I said, putting it in the top 5 for an MCU film there's outside of probably Thor: The Dark World, there hasn't been an MCU film that I didn't like basically.
Yeah.
The MCU does a terrific job in making good films that, at least as of late, have felt more different from one another.
Yeah, definitely. And even at Thor: Dark World, it's not a bad film. It's just, in comparison, it pales to, the movie like Black Panther.
Yeah, so like being a top 5 MCU film for me that's a really, really good film.
Exactly. All right, yeah. All right. So let's go on and move to our ranking of the film. What we're going to be doing is we're going to give it a letter grade. So we have A plus being our pinnacle, something like a classic film, like something that's considered a masterpiece by many, and an
Yeah.
F being something that is notably just not I'll go as far
I
as to
don't.
say a garbage film.
Yeah.
In my opinion, an F would be like the Emoji Movie or something along those lines. Something that I just don't have respect for, and I think was just should not would have benefited if had it not been made. So
Absolutely.
all right, so from an A plus to just an F minus, what are you giving it?
Probably at this point, I'd be in the B plus to A minus range for me, which is amazing praise. For at least for me, that's a really really great film. The only reason I don't have it at an A plus is for that first act that felt slightly separated from the rest of the film.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I'm balancing it between that A minus and the flat A stage.
Yeah,
Um, and the first act does drag a bit and seems a little unnecessary, but even in that first act, it's exciting action scenes. It gives a lot of backstory to characters. It builds the characters into who they are.
yeah, and
So
like I said, I can forgive that first act for the most part because everything following that is some of the best stuff I've seen from the MCU. So
yeah, exactly. So even when this movie is bad, I only call it bad on terms of what else this movie brought to the table.
yeah,
So the first
absolutely,
act to the third act being, in my opinion, one of the best third acts of a Marvel movie I've seen,
absolutely,
with
yeah,
the way everything comes together, and just wraps into its own thing. The first act kind of feels not to be like a tonal mess, which is easy to do in these kind of movies, but just to be a little bit unnecessary in times.
yeah. No, that ending in this film is absolutely fantastic. So
And so yeah, let me give you before we close down completely. What was your final thoughts on the final few minutes of this film?
I thought it was amazing. The almost redeeming of Killmonger at the end was brilliantly well done. Because it just so happened to be sunset, and his father always told him, the sun sets in Wakanda. There's nothing more beautiful than that. So having T'Challa take him out, seeing the sunset, and him ultimately choosing to die rather than be essentially live in chains is what he. I think the way that's the way he put it
Right.
is rather die than be in chains. Bury him in the ocean with his people. Um, I loved that ending.
Yeah, I will say that the line he says at the end there, "Bury me in the ocean, so I can die like those who jumped off the ship," knowing that death, being a free man, is better than life as a imprisoned man.
Yeah,
That gave me chills. And I really have to say I appreciated how he died for a cause instead of one claiming that he was wrong and say spare my life, keep me alive just so that for the sake of being alive. No, kill me let me die for the cause.
hmm
You beat me, but just don't forget what I said. Don't forget who I was, because everyone deserves a fair shot, or at
yeah,
least everyone. Maybe he wasn't going for the fair shot, but along that line, the oppressed need a chance. A
yeah. No, I
revolution isn't
mean,
in state; it deserves to be in state.
we've talked about him at length in this review, and I am a little upset that we won't get to see him again in the MCU, but it's worth it because his ending was perfect for this character.
Exactly, and that even gets into the very end. The United Nations scene.
Yeah, the
Um,
cutscene or the
yeah,
post
the
credit.
first after credit scene. It feels very honorable to both Killmonger and to Black Panther's father, T'Kali.
Yeah,
It felt like an homage to both characters, and if it just concluded a fantastic film in a very beautiful way.
yeah. The first post credit scene balancing the meat essentially is the middle between their 2 points of view for the majority of the film. The middle, the compromise, if you will, is where they get to at the end, and I really appreciate that.
Yep. So overall, I think we can both say we really enjoyed this. And have you not seen this yet, and yet you still want to hear the spoilers, nonetheless, go see the movie because we can't do it justice. The beautiful shots, the characters, even in the probably 45 minutes to an hour we've been talking about this, it's hard to get to all the characters because it goes in depth with so many people, and it really does a fantastic job. And I think Marvel and Disney really hit the nail on the head this time. And so I'm happy that I got to see this as early as I did. And I'm glad we have this podcast to get to talk about a movie like this.
Absolutely. This film is one that I highly recommend to anybody.
Exactly.
Period. So, if you got nothing else to say, man, I think that's about it.
Yeah, I think that's about everything. We'll see you in a week or so. All right, have a good one. Adios.